All right, good afternoon. I know it's a late session, so I hope you all have had enough coffee, enough ice cream. If you haven't, I would be happy if you would go and grab some quickly before we get going, because I'm hoping that we have quite an invigorating and exciting discussion today. So thank you all for being here. My name is Admas Kanyagia. I lead the social impact team at GitHub. And the mission of the social impact team is to activate GitHub's people, product, and platform to address the pervasive and persistent social issues that we see in the world around us. It was quite telling in this morning's keynote how Nat highlighted the great, incredible work of Katie Bowman and the larger team in discovering the black hole image. And that is the kind of work and opportunity that open source can afford us. We know that collaboration, we know that the multiple perspectives, and really the ingenuity and energy of developers and others who are on the platform are actually being used to address really projects that have incredible social purpose for the world that we see today. And so that is what today's conversation is about, and thank you all for joining us to have it. I would like to introduce our panelists before we begin. I'm excited to introduce Phuc Dang, who founded FOSSASIA in 2009 as a community devoted to improving people's life through sharing open technologies, knowledge, and fostering global connections. Hong was recently elected as a board director of the Open Source Initiative, and she also acts, as a second job, as the inner source manager at Zalando, where she helps to bring open source culture, practices within corporate walls, and supports the company to become a good open source citizen. Thank you for joining us today, Hong. Our other esteemed panelist is Katherine Stihler. She is the chief executive of the Open Knowledge Foundation and has been in that role since February of 2019. Prior to this, she represented Scotland as a member of the European Parliament since 1999. Quite an interesting day today for you, Katherine, I'm sure. As vice chair of the European Parliament's Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee, she worked on digital policy, prioritizing the digital single market and digital skills, better accessibility of digital products for the disabled, as well as citizen online data protection and privacy. She also wrote a number of influential reports and opinions calling for libraries to be included in the copyright exemptions that we talked about in Mike Linksayer's panel earlier today. So we're so excited to have Katherine and her perspective to join us today. Welcome, Katherine. So I invited the panelists to spend a few minutes just sharing about their work before we dive into the discussion. So I'll hand it off to Katherine next.
So thank you, Admas, and thank you to all of you for being here today. And it's quite bizarre. This is the first time I've never stood in the European elections, and I wanted to share a story with you. My husband's American, and he became a British citizen just last year. And so the irony being is this is the first time my husband's ever had the vote in an election in Britain, and it's the first time I've never stood in that election. But anyway, he voted, so that's a good thing. And I think, as Maria Chika said about voting, how important it all is. But my route into understanding about open source was really through copyright reform, as you've touched upon. And it was through that experience, however hard that was, that got me involved in open knowledge. And when the opportunity came along to come and run open knowledge, I thought it was a perfect fit, because we really stand at this crossroads between either a private proprietary future where only knowledge is accessible to those who can pay and who can afford, or we keep fighting for an open future where we want it to be fair, free, and open for us all, that open world that we all desire. And I think as I reflect upon this and the politics around that, I think it's very timely to come and talk about the benefits of open source. So if we look at my next slide, we've got kind of 3 slides here, if that's okay, if someone can put that on, just to kind of say about what open knowledge is. We celebrated 15 years on Monday, so we're so happy that that's the case. Why don't I've got the button, don't I? Sorry, there we go. I did in politics, somebody did that for me, but I've got to do that now on my own. But anyway, here we go. There we go. But our mission is an open world where all non-personal information is open, free for everyone to use, build on and share, and also importantly, where creators and innovators are fairly recognised and rewarded. And our 3 strands of focus that we're looking at just now are in the relatable, and that's something I think we will talk a little bit about, on health, access to medicine, on education, and that brings in the copyright work that I've worked on about open access as well, and then on work, about jobs and inequality, because our world is more unequal than ever before, and we've got to do something about that. And then we look at kind of 3, we were asked to give kind of 3 things that we've been looking at. And one of those is certainly what open knowledge was founded upon, and which Dr. Rufus Pollock, who was the founder of open knowledge, defined the open definition that's used everywhere. And I'm so proud that it's open knowledge that led that. Then we look at CCAN, that platform that allows all of the open data that could be out there onto something that can actually be translatable. Very important. And then our new work on frictionless data, which is described to me as what shipping containers are to the shipping industry, frictionless data is to the data world. And I'm so proud to be part of an organisation working at the cutting edge of that. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I will certainly not hog this microphone. And I'm going to hand back to Admas, who's going to introduce your next speaker. So thank you very much for listening. Over to Admas. Thank you.
It's always interesting to have 2 mics at once, so I'll give this back to you, Katherine. I'll introduce Hong next to speak about FOSSASIA.
Hello, I'm not doing politics, I always have to click myself. So I thought that I will start to tell you about how I got into open source. In 2007, my friend helped me to install Ubuntu to replace Windows XP at that time. As a beginner user, I really liked it in the way that you don't get constant update all the time and you don't get virus alert every day. And I love the fact that you can download software from your terminal by typing a few command lines. So that really got me excited, and then I started to participate in the local Linux user group get together almost every month, where I met amazing free software contributor who taught me how to write Python, how to use various software projects, GIMP, Inkscape, how the community works, and many more. But it wasn't the software that got me inspired. I was really surprised how a person could contribute voluntarily into one project over 15, 20 years and still so excited about it, talk so passionate about what he's doing. I feel that the best thing that could happen to anyone, or at least to me, is that the ability to be able to work on something that you love and be happy about it. Yeah. So what I try to say is, it's the people, the community that got me to open source. And then in 2009, I founded FOSSASIA together with my partner Mario Belling, who is also here today. FOSSASIA is the community of people from everywhere who want to make a better future with open technologies. Some of the core activity of FOSSASIA, we develop software and hardware, run education program, organize events throughout Asia. We have a very active online community on GitHub, over 3,000 members. So you can just go in, ask any question, somebody will be there to answer. These are a few FOSSASIA projects developed by the community, everything hosted on GitHub. I just gonna say like a few things on the list. Sushi AI, basically an alternative to Alexa, Echo, or Google Home, but it built entirely on open source. You can actually build your own speaker. The schematics available on GitHub, and install the application on your local machine and make your own personal assistant. I will pass it around. And there we go. I believe that everyone here knows Eventbrite. You need a ticket to get to this event, right? Eventbrite is a solution, open source solution that offers similar functionalities and features, exactly like Eventbrite. We are using it also to organize our own conference. Nextcloud is using it, and I hope that GitHub consider to try out this solution because it's built by the open source community and it hosted on your platform, GitHub. Pocket Science Lab, we started a project a few years ago. This is our first open hardware project. The aim of the project is to make science affordable and accessible to people in developing countries. Basically, it's a multifunctional device, including oscilloscope, wave generator, logic analyzer, multimeter, and many more. I also have the product here today, which I'm going to pass it around if you want to check this out. Thank you very much. Code here, this is one of our education projects. The reason why I want to mention this project, every season of Code Hit, we bring in over 600 new users to GitHub. Basically, we teach young developers how to use Git and GitHub to contribute to various FOSSASIA repositories with the help of a FOSSASIA mentor. Everything happens online via GitHub, and the communication, everything on GitHub. This is a picture taken in March at the celebration of FOSSASIA 10 years anniversary. This is our annual event, always happen in March in Singapore. So if you want to visit it, check out the website for the next year event. And a week from now, on Thursday, we're going to organize the Open Tech Summit here in Berlin in Motion Lab. So if you are around, please join the website opentechsummit.net. I think that's all I have.
We'll just get set up for our panel discussion. I'll sit here. And thank you both for sharing a high-level overview of your work. I think that's always helpful to set some context for our discussion. So, my first question to this esteemed panel is, what are the barriers and challenges that you face every day in your open source for good work? And Katherine, would you start?
So I think it's about what we said before, Admas, about relatability and understanding. And I think that with people that understand that are taking it technically able, it's great. But for those that are not, it is something that we have to translate. And that's why looking at projects and giving examples and storytelling around some of the great work that happens is really important moving forward. So I think it is about understanding relatability.
Hong, what would you say?
So I would say sustainability and scale up of a project. I know that many of us here contribute to open source project, but it's always the question how you can actually scale up the development, how you can sustain your community. It's not easy to get individuals who work from everywhere getting together in one community and follow a common goal or common practices. And it's always a challenging for us at FOSSASIA. So we develop common guidelines and also recommended best practices for our developers so that we are able to stay on track and keep moving forward. So, but I would say the major challenge of open source project is scaling up the project and the community.
Yeah, and interesting time right now with our announcement today about GitHub sponsors, and I think one thing that we're really thinking about is how does it apply to projects like this that have some social good and social purpose in the world around us. Yeah. My next question for you both is, what are the opportunities? What opportunities do you see in the landscape that will help deepen and amplify the impact of your work? Hong, would you start?
Yes, I can start. So there's a lot of opportunities in open source. For instance, because of open source, we can learn from the best people, the brightest mind of all the amazing projects. And GitHub, contribute a lot in the ecosystem, how you get people, allow people to work on projects together. And another opportunity in the open source world, AICD, the company, corporation, enterprises started to embrace open source a lot. Like Microsoft released so many amazing tools. And the company that I work with, Zalando, is a fashion store, but we developed so many software and released so many software in open source so that the ecosystem getting better and better. And this is a great opportunity for open source.
Katherine.
Thank you. So I think that there's huge amounts of opportunity, and I think that when you look at, say, from a policy perspective, I could just touch upon that. One thing that maybe kind of sounds so boring, but actually is so important, is in public procurement. If you look at EU public procurement, if you can get open source as just the standard way that business is done, then the opportunity and the innovation, the creativity you can get from that will be, I think, a fantastic opportunity. But more than that, I think if you think about how creativity, collaboration, the whole innovation piece is at the center of what open source, I think, is all about. And the more people that we can convince, the better. And I think that's something where, as someone who's quite new to the open world, but who is passionate about it, but maybe not as technical as many of you are in this room, I think that if we can build that bridge between the tech and the human side of things, we will be able to be more relatable, it will be able to be delivered better, and it will be a force for good to fight for the open world I want to see as a reality, not as something that is just envisioned, but actually the reality of an open place and an open world. Thanks.
Yeah. So I also want to emphasize what Katherine just said. I would like to call out for the organization like Open Knowledge Foundation, Open Source Initiative, and many more development corporations that try to educate people in like open source adoption and policy. So great work, by the way. Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
You know, I'd love to talk a little bit about something that you just both brought up. You talked about policy, and you talked a little bit about this idea of the ecosystem as well. So as we think about different pieces of that ecosystem, you know, one that I'm particularly interested is nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, as well as government itself. What would be more helpful in your work with government? You talked about procurement specifically, but as you think about, you know, maybe Hong, you can start and talk about your work with UNESCO. What has been helpful in really driving open source contribution, adoption, etc., with supporting organizations like that?
And I think the advantage of the UNESCO is it is a global organization, so it has a very wide reach to the world, to the community. And we work with UNESCO on different hackathon science event where we educate people. They also have their own FOSS initiative within the UN, and we've been working with them like for the past 4 years and help them to bring open source education to countries in Southeast Asia. Yeah. So but it's definitely a beneficial for open source community to work with these global organization, to increase the reach and impact.
I completely, I think the whole aspect of the global nature. I mean, I manage a team now remotely from Mexico City to Singapore. And when I say that, that's from my study in Dunfermline in Scotland. And people are kind of like, that's quite an amazing thing. You can do that. And you can do that because the technology allows you and are able to do that. But equally, we've built a community over 15 years, which is global. We've got people that we know across the world. This is something that is of great benefit when we're putting forward our vision of this open world, where open source is the heart of that as well. But I think that if you're asking us about where does this go to, how does it, I think fundamentally it is this thing about how do we make it relatable, how do we get people to understand. We've had developed a school of data about data literacy, but it's people that say come to our website are the people who would come anyway. How do we get to people who might not see this but need this in terms of where the future rests? Because we know our kids at the moment, I've got a 13-year-old and a 7-year-old, and we know that, something like, 80% of the jobs they will be doing aren't created yet. And this is something, I don't think this has ever happened before. We're in this situation where the uncertainty is an opportunity, but it's also uncertainty. And for many people, it can go these two ways of being a more closed or a more open future, and we have to keep it open.
Great, thank you for those perspectives. One other question I have is the role of companies like GitHub and open source companies like GitHub. So you talked a little bit of the advantages we see is that the ecosystem is maturing, there's more resources, there's more language, but we still have far to go. We still have a lot to go in terms of relatability and accessibility. But what can companies like GitHub do to help?
Keep the conversation going. I mean, you're doing. I mean, this is a fantastic event. You've got people. I mean, I got to know GitHub because of copyright reform and saw the great work that you do. And I think this is something where you have a role to play. Whether how you do that is another question. But I think the key thing is how do you get reach beyond your key kind of challenge is how we're going to get that relatability to communities that are non-traditional to what you've used to been dealing with.
Yeah, so I think GitHub is continually doing amazing thing. I'm so excited about the sponsor feature that you just announced today. We're just talking about the challenges, which is like the lack of resources in open source project and community. So if anyone here would like to support Asia community, go and donate to our repository. This is a very good idea. And again, I also see that organize event like this, an opportunity to bring people together to network. How many FOSSASIA contributors are here? They're over there. Yeah, so thank you GitHub for bringing us together. I think we have like 9-10 people here today come from our community. And I also see that you constantly listen to the developers. You always have continued conversation. What can you make better for the community, which is really good. And if I talk on behalf of FOSSASIA, I would say, of course, we want to scale up our project like CodeHit. We want not only to reach the people from particular region, but everywhere. So it would be great if we can work together with GitHub on that to teach more people about Git and contribute to various open source projects, not only of FOSSASIA, but in all organizations in the ecosystem.
Thank you both. An incredible vision. So one thing that you both talked about is this idea of global communities. And I think it's something that we think a lot about as we see the ecosystem maturing, as we see opportunities, that incredible visual that Nat showed during his keynote about really that open source contributions on GitHub come from, most of them really come from outside of the US. But part of that conversation is really about inclusion and what does inclusion really look like from a global context. And so what are some of the ways in which you've been very thoughtful and intentional about inclusion in your open source work? Because I think those kinds of best practices could be something that we can share even much more widely.
Well, I can say something. So inclusion. So I think the key thing to building an inclusive community is to create a very opening and welcoming culture for the community. And this is not easy at all. We have people come from various backgrounds, and sometimes I feel a little bit uncomfortable by some of the reaction of maintainers or developers online. People get sometimes impatient when new joiners getting on board. So as FOSSASIA, we really tried our best to inform the community. A lot of conflict happened because of misunderstanding. People are not aware that we all come from different backgrounds. We don't have the same knowledge. And then some people will get offended when just because we don't see each other in a way that everyone comes from a different background. So we constantly communicate this message to our community and try to work together with many different organizations. So I think the thing that we did very well during the past few years, we developed a community. At the same time, we constantly look out for lessons, good practices, and examples from organizations like DBN community, GNOME Foundation. So we actually collaborate with different open source org around the world to learn what is the best way to grow the community. And talking about inclusion, I believe that there is also somebody in the audience working on an open source diversity here in Berlin, and it's like initiative like this. We always part of this chain and try to connect with people. And another thing about inclusiveness that I want to mention, so open source is not only about software developers. Of course, you are the most important people. But in order to build an open source or to build a project, we also need people who can promote the project, who can test, who can do documentation, who can do design, and many more. Yeah, and this is something that we want to focus on. So we try to tell people that if you don't have the technical background or knowledge, there's so many different ways that you can contribute to a project, and we need to push more on this direction, I believe.
Anything to add?
Yeah, coming from a non-technical background myself, it is interesting to come into, and I have to be, I mean, it's been a real eye-opener, kind of how collaborative, I guess coming out of politics where at the moment it's not particularly collaborative, but coming to a community where it is community driven and it is about trying to do the best and to learn from each other and to share and to create that sense of being something bigger than just what you are working, you're sharing this, and that is really powerful. And I think actually open source, you know, we talk a lot about collaboration in terms of innovation, but actually this is actually happening. And I think that's a great strength because you've got the agility to look at things, to develop things, to react to issues that are pertinent at that moment and to do some good, which it would maybe take, in policy terms, years to do that. And that's where the challenge, I think, rests, is that so many policymakers are just, I think Margarita Scherk was saying that and touching upon that, are just so far behind what's the reality, and by the time you make the policy, it's already whatever many years out of date, and this is going to be moving forward, I think, one of the big challenges we face. But in terms of inclusion and community, I think this is something which is a great advantage that you all have, and I really do think in terms of Open Knowledge Foundation, with their network and community out there, it's something that I want to tap into in a better and a more constructive way than maybe we've done in the past.
Interesting. No, absolutely. I think that these best practices, you know, thinking about leveraging those, this idea of like really valuing all different kinds of expertise, being very intentional about community building. I'd love to talk a little bit about community building next. So, you know, what has that been like? I know you've only been at Open Knowledge Foundation for a short while, but I'm sure you understand sort of the history of community building over the past, over the past tenure of the organization. You know, Hong, you've done this, you know, really grassroots effort in building communities. You know, what has that journey really been like? Katherine,
I think the whole thing about not being in control, I think the whole thing about the fact that the community goes out and does and grows and changes and develops, and that's the creative sense of it. And I also think, I mean, it was just, I did my first week I did an article and the community in Brazil, I think translated into Portuguese or something, and I was like, this is amazing. And it was just this sense of being part of this bigger world, this bigger picture that you can see, and people relate to that. And I think at the moment, but frankly, with politics being so paralysed and broken, we have an opportunity to talk about this world that we want to see, and we can do that through some of the work that we're doing in terms of some of the project work that certainly you've been doing, but also just in terms of what we see as the future. So it's, I just feel so blessed that I've got a community out there that's global, and I can talk to people from all over the world, across all these continents, and we all share this common vision. That's so powerful.
Yeah, so the lesson that I learned from the FOSSASIA community the past 10 years, I think something got to do with empowerment. Yeah, so we have our developer here who used to be the student and then become to be mentor of the next project, and also FOSSASIA intern that get together with very senior developers to sitting here. So that's actually, there is no hierarchy or barriers between the people in the community. And what we try to achieve is, in order to sustain the community, to constantly need to give the responsibility for the younger developer, for the younger generation. So our students, our interns move on to become mentor after some years, and they take on the responsibilities to train younger people. At the moment, we also work, we also a mentor organization for Google Code-In, which is the program for young students between 13 and 17 years old, that show them how to work and how to work with open source and contribute to the community in a very young age. So I think another key is start with education. Yeah, it's never too early or too late to learn something. Yeah, so empowerment and education are some that I believe is the key of growing community.
I like that. I like that. So my next question is, how can developers or users or social scientists or others get engaged in your work?
Well, I already said it before. We all on GitHub. We also have a community on GitHub. There are so many projects under FOSSASIA. You can check out the repository. We actually constantly need help. And I also pass around our product. If you have any ideas to help us to improve, help us to build the next open source personal assistant, or help us to build a solution that can replace Eventbrite, or you can start to use Eventbrite for your own events.
I think you said something there about kind of about education, about open-mindedness, and I think that's something that's really strong in the, you know, being open-minded and being able to see the opportunity. But I think, you know, in terms of sharing ideas, being there, being out there, being able to communicate. We've got different ways that we can communicate, certainly different communities, but certainly ways that you can give ideas and share that. I think, though, that for the future, I think that certainly from, you know, I've only been at Open Knowledge for 14 weeks, so it's a start and it's a journey, but I think for us, it's getting back to what we fundamentally are, and that's about open knowledge. And somehow along the way, we got caught up in the data debate, which is part of our DNA, but equally, it's about knowledge. And that's what you said as well. It's knowledge that's important as we move forward. Somehow we kind of lost the whole thing about knowledge society, knowledge equality. You know, it's somehow lost in some of the debates that we've been having. We need to grab that back and say why that's important, because that is the empowerment, and that is what will take us forward. And this is where open source is so important. So I'm excited, and I'm learning, and you're always learning, aren't we? You know, and that's the thing, is to make sure people always have that opportunity to learn.
Yeah. So I'm also curious, when you ask us, like, what can GitHub do to the community? I want to ask back to GitHub the question. So this is a panel about open source for good. What are the initiatives at GitHub? Could you share a little bit with us?
No, happy to. And I think that, you know, part of the work to date has really been about fostering conversations like this, and how do we start to build a narrative that open source is more than just about, you know, freedom of expression. It's more than just about, you know, the opportunity for developers to contribute around, you know, programming languages, that there's this bigger purpose towards the technology that many of us are building that has an impact in the real world around us. Now, this is a completely new idea for us. I think that we are starting to see, and it really came around after we started to see this incredible organic evolution of activity on the platform, of individual developers who were developing or, you know, working with many others on code to address this particular issue that they saw in their community, you know, such as assistive technology because somebody in their family was disabled, for example, to large philanthropic organizations like the Gates Foundation, who are using open source to expand financial inclusion for the world's poor. And this was completely organic. It's not specific outreach that we did, but I think as those of us who are sitting in the social sector are starting to understand, technology can be an incredible asset for social change, and open source has a really incredible role to play in expanding technology for that use. It lends itself actually really, really well to addressing these issues because, one, it brings in diverse perspectives that are truly global. Two, it's based on collaboration. The social problems that we see in the world around us are persistent, they're pervasive, they're not going to be solved by silver bullet solutions. Like, we need all of us hands on deck to be working on them. And I think three, it really harnesses this incredible creative energy that, you know, developers have, that those are on the platform have, and in a way are starting to harness to use for these purposes. And so what we're thinking about the program is in a couple of ways. I think one, more narrative building work like this. How do we get the story out around the incredible work that's happening on the platform? It's not our work, it's work like the work that both of your organizations and your community are doing. So how do we amplify that message, and what role do we have, especially as sitting at the center of this ecosystem, to do? I think two is really thinking about inclusion in open source. And I think that, we know from the research that, open source is not necessarily as diverse as, technology itself is not necessarily as diverse as the world around us. And as the world is changing, as we see the fact that future developers are not going to be coming from the same places that they come from today, that we need to encourage this burgeoning and emerging communities in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. There's an important critical piece of this, that is, how do we make open source a place that is inclusive, that is inviting, and that also can leverage this incredible talent that we see across the world. And so starting to think about that is really critical as well. And I would say the third prong is really thinking about ways in which we can deepen the capacity of non-governmental organizations to participate in open source. And that's really all kinds of nonprofits or non-governmental organizations, from the mom and pop nonprofit that is, needs to use an open source volunteer database for managing their volunteer programs, to large philanthropic organizations who are starting to pour in an incredible amount of resources into open source that we can leverage and partner, to government. I think also that's another critical piece of this. I think with government, the open source movement is a little bit further ahead than with non-governmental organizations, but they're a critical part because of we're seeing incredible ways where government is using open source to help citizens connect with their government, to get benefits, etc. And so those are sort of three ways in which we hope to start to impact open source in this way, but it's very nascent, and I think today is one of the first steps to doing that. Yeah, great. So we have just a few minutes left. I think before I started this panel, they said that we couldn't do any audience Q&A, but I'm going to take a chance because we do have time, and we do have handheld mics. So I wanted to open it up to the audience if there are any questions that you may have of the panelists. And so, I see your hand. And I'll run to you.
Yeah, I cannot see him.
Okay, so I have a question. What's your opinion on Khan Academy? This is the learning tool that actually I've used, that maybe you are familiar with.
Could you repeat your question?
Yeah, so Khan Academy is I think it's an open source that empowers, enables people to learn, basically.
So you're asking about
Khan Academy, yes.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great platform. So any platform that fosters remote education, and by chance, at the last FOSSASIA Summit, we just announced the FOSSASIA Academy, with conduct offer online courses that teach people more on open source. So when I study in Vietnam, and I understand that they actually don't teach the idea about open source in school. Of course, you learn how to write Python, you learn different programming languages, but there is not a particular course that teach you how to behave in a community or how to contribute to community. But I totally, if you ask about my opinion about Khan Academy, I used to take a few courses there. I think that more and more people started a platform that allow people from everywhere can share the knowledge and learning remotely. It is a great initiative. Yeah.
Any other questions? There's one there. Yes, right here in the front. And we do have a runner now.
Hi, what social causes or social areas do you guys think that open source is mostly still not as good in?
I think that's quite a hard one unless you're looking at a specific project. But I think that on the general basis of it, I just think it's about explaining what it actually is, what it means, why would why would someone be interested in it? I keep thinking about, somebody told me a story about a fridge and about the fact that, you know, we buy a smart fridge, you buy the physical fridge, but the software in the fridge is not yours. But if it was open source, it would be yours. And there's something about owning something, but not owning something that actually brings value. And this is going to be more and more of a debate. So I throw the fridge thing out to you. I was having a conversation with a foster carer, and she got it by the fridge example. And I thought, well, we have to give more and more examples about why this issue and area is so important to individuals who we would not be touching otherwise.
I totally agree with you. I think this is a really hard question. And people often ask, okay, so you do open source, what kind of social problem or challenge that you have to improve? What area in the society that you actually have an impact? So I think open source is like a tool. So we're not talking about a specific problem, but this is the ability that people have the resources and knowledge to fix any problem that they have in life. So it depends on the community, and the people decide for themselves what kind of social problem they want to fix. But open source is the idea of collaboration and make people feel, empower them to see that they can always find out a solution by working together in a more collaborative way.
I would agree. So anyway, we are out of time, and I hope there aren't any burning questions, but you're welcome to, you know, approach any one of us and our panelists before we end. But incredible conversation about accessibility, the importance of being able to build communities in ways that really harness the global nature of open source, and ways in which we can really bring social sector organizations like NGOs as well as government into the fold. So thank you both for joining us today for this great conversation and for your time. And audience, please join me in thanking them as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.